Sarah, you have been operating at the frontier of applied AI for quite some time, and there's so much to learn from your journey. Thank you for doing this. To kick us off, could you please tell us all in the room about your career path thus far and how it's gotten you where you are today? And then just one more question. Given the less traveled frontier newness of all of this, tell us how Notion's applied AI team is structured. And do your recommendations make their way to the product and engineering, or does your team carry out them at all?
It's a lot of questions.
Thank you.
So I'm Sarah. I lead a lot of our AI teams at Notion. You have to excuse me, I'm losing my voice. So I've been at Notion for about 2 years. I've always worked in machine learning. I went to Brown University as an undergrad, did research in computer vision there, as well as at UC Berkeley. Then I was at Google on the location history machine learning teams. Did some startup stints, worked at Robinhood for about 3 years, led the machine learning team there, and then came to Notion because I felt really strongly that the idea of having a system of record for enterprise work, how to utilize AI for that was really exciting. And that's kind of the journey that we've been on. You'll have to remind me your other question.
No, the other question is, we want to understand how the Notion's applied AI team is structured. And to follow on that, typically whatever the recommendation that you make, does it make its way to the product and engineering, or does your team carry out that work?
I see. Yeah, so I mean, all of Notion is an AI product at this point. A very large percentage of data edited in Notion is edited by agents or by agentic outputs, MCPs or API. Almost half of all searches on Notion in AI-enabled workspaces are done by agents, right? And so humans and agents are our customers. And Notion is meant to be the place where enterprise work happens and the best place for that collaboration, and that doesn't necessarily need to be by humans. So as a result, when you ask how the team is structured, you know, there are people, my teams particularly, who specialize in our agent harness, model selection, usage-based pricing strategies, tool orchestration, how we structure our tools. But everyone at Notion is contributing in some sense because agents are our customers just as much as humans are. So your next question was, do we influence the product?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and actually, so Sachs was, I was on Sachs. We had a long chat with our co-founder Simon, Notion's co-founder, with Sachs and Alessio that was released last night, and we talked about this a little bit. Where I firmly believe that you want to empower everyone in your company to understand the user journey that you're aiming for, and you need to have clarity of product vision. It's very easy to write code now. It's about what you built, and as a result, most of our great ideas come from individuals on the team. We're lucky because Notion employees use Notion pretty much more than anyone else. There are very few companies that use Notion more than Notion. There are some, and we love them, but very few. And so a lot of our best products come from friction that we have and how we work. Really, like, we pretty much, the way that any idea is developed is by putting it in development almost immediately among our internal use cases at Notion.
I saw how Notion is using Notion when Ivan and Akshay gave me and Krish a demo on Notion. Yeah.
I mean, it's the easiest sales thing where, like, someone's like, how are you using custom agents? And I'm like, why don't I just show you how I run this one work stream, and I'll show you the Slack channel, and I'll show you the meeting notes that are generated and how the agent files the tasks, and you know, it listens in Slack to file new tasks, and it's very easy for us to demo because it's how we work. And you know, when I was at Robinhood, it was a lot harder to think about automating option support flows without trading options, right? So it's definitely really fun as a product and an AI engineer to work on something you use.
Lovely. Getting into details, you open your excellent recent essay that prompted this chat. Thank you. And describing a model upgrade where per token price stays the same, but the cost per task grows 3x because output tokens balloon. The rate card doesn't really exactly lie. It just hides the unit that matters. At the high level, What does it look like doing this as often as consistently you do? How do you really measure cost, quality, and latency at the task level, shifting from the token to the specific capability that you have to execute on the
Yeah,
Notion platform?
it's a great question. I think rate cards are sales instruments, and everyone's objective is to be as cheap as possible and max out a benchmark, right? That doesn't mean that you should adopt it or believe it. I mean, obviously the rates you should believe, they're contractual, but so for instance, let's use web search. Let's not just think about compute. Let's think about a web search API. Our harness can call on web search API inside Notion, and you might think that the fastest and cheapest web search API is the best web search API. But part of these subprocessors, they're actually figuring out how to search, right? And if you do fewer searches, your trajectory is cheaper. So even if something is twice as fast and twice as expensive, if it does the quarter the number of searches, you're still cheaper on the more expensive platform. And that's also true with thinking. For instance, Opus is a very, very capable, fantastic model. It's really bad at correcting itself. If you tell it, I actually think you did that wrong, please improve, it's a lot more stubborn. And so if you think about the type of model you'd want to use to build an agent, right, maybe that's not the right configured model that you'd want to do for that. And so to answer your question about how we choose, one of our primary investments is in our evaluation team. So we have a team of data scientists, software engineers, and something that we call model behavior engineers that work really hard to create a representative data set of what our agents need to be good at. And then from that, benchmark costs for different use cases. And different use cases have different cost needs. Onboarding, we're okay spending more to make it as fast as possible. Like when you start Notion AI, we will pay more so that it's snappy, right? However, if you're running an asynchronous task, we care much more about its ability to self-heal on failure than we do about latency. And if we're using usage-based pricing, we want to make sure that you feel like you're getting the value on your dollar. If it's a free onboarding trial, we want to make sure that we're getting the value on the dollar. And we might value different customers differently, right? And so model selection is an art that is necessary in such a broad landscape.
Lovely. Just follow up on that. That Notion's fascinating auto model features almost 75% of the AI traffic. And just want to understand a little bit more on what are the invariants you enforce so downstream product behavior stays stable as the model gets switched at the front?
Yeah, this is actually difficult. It's also just different. Okay, so the question, as I understand it, is how do you have a model feature, an auto feature that can change models? There's different levels of complexity to that. There's like selecting the right auto model, and that's hard because especially when it's right now, a lot of people presume it's a very cheap model that's not working well, and that's just bad marketing from Notion. Auto is really the best model that we think you need. It's not a cheap model underneath, unfortunately, because the cheap models don't do as well as what we think is the minimum level of care that we want to give our customers interfacing with our agents. Upgrading them for like our corner chat, our single agent run isn't that hard because we have a set of evals that we know we want to work well. What's difficult is when people configure custom agents that are running asynchronously in the background and they are configured to work with certain performance. That can be very hard for things like switching between models because transcripts don't port over very well from each other. So we have to do a lot of engineering to make ourselves interoperable between models. And those abstractions can be quite difficult as model providers want more and more customization in their model to prevent you from being able to switch between models. One of Notion's selling points is that we're the Switzerland of AI models, which is to say that a lot of our customers don't want to have to choose or make a bet on OpenAI or Anthropic or open source, right? And so one of our core competencies is being able to give them the frontier today, even if it wasn't the frontier yesterday. And so a core investment is that technology that can seamlessly switch between them, even within a single chat.
Lovely, lovely. One of the things that we understood is that you implemented a Notion scale that model switches every 2 to 3 weeks. I'd like to understand how did your team design the guardrails to degrade gracefully when the model switches?
Well, hopefully we never degrade when the model switches. Should only be an upgrade. The reason that we probably have that snippet, we switch models every 2 to 3 weeks is multifold. One, new models are being released way faster than they used to be, right? So it's not really, it's nice that we can update with the newest models, but that has a lot more to do with the pace of research than Notion. I think what's more interesting is that oftentimes when we switch models, it's not necessarily just like updating Sonnet or upgrading GPT 5.2 to 5.4, right? That's not like what we're doing when we say we're switching models. It's because we've developed a new harness or new implementation, or there's specific tools that we think work better with a different model, and we're constantly evaluating. We have, over 300 tools that our agent just for Notion alone is referring to, and the whole company is updating and working on the different implementations and structures of those tools. So it's a configuration change, yeah.
Of course, we got to talk about pricing. Akshay was here a few minutes ago, and then Krish and Akshay were discussing a pricing, and then he mentioned, and Notion's pricing also has changed from seat to even including everything as part of the seat-based model that we have been using for quite some time, and now recently shifted and a lot of usage-based pricing. And Akshay said, you pay for what work you get done. Usage-based pricing for agents is anything but simple because cost of a task isn't known ahead until it gets completed, right? And what principles guided the pricing shift in terms of the product and measurement capabilities that made it possible to charge in a way that customers want?
Yeah, the shift is primarily our launch of our asynchronous custom agent product. The idea is that an IT administrator or an evangelist in the company can create a custom agent that lives in your Slack channels, that lives in Linear, that lives in Notion, and is auto-healing your workspace for you in a way that you configured. And so that value doesn't grow by the number of seats. That value grows by how much that agent is doing, right? So in and of itself, it just kind of makes more sense as a business model. But even more concretely, different users adopt AI to a different amount. And it was becoming, we were nerfing ourselves. Like there were a lot of capabilities. For instance, our autofill capability. If those of you are Notion users, you can have a Notion database. You can have AI autofill that database. You can imagine for some databases, you really don't want an entire agent harness running on Opus and doing searches to update a database feature, right? But then we had some amazing power users and enterprises that were asking for more enhanced autofill. And it was like, absolutely, we can provide that to you. But for some workspaces, if we're charging $20 a seat, this is going to cost a lot more. And we were in a place where we had power enterprises saying, can we please pay for this, right? And we couldn't afford to serve it to everyone. But if people want something and they're willing to pay for it as a business, we should provide it to them. So it was kind of an obvious decision.
Lovely, lovely. Let's get into the evals that we discussed a bit ago, Sarah. Notion's eval signal is uniquely valuable to labs because Notion is fundamentally an horizontal product. And definitely the foundation model labs run products used across every knowledge work task imaginable as horizontal as it gets. So I want to understand a little bit about how Notion makes eval scorecards different from a lab that can generate from its own usage data. Is one thing if you can quickly touch upon.
Of course. So what makes Notion unique is that we aren't targeting, unlike typical SaaS models where you're targeting a vertical, coding, legal, healthcare, we're trying to target a specific horizontal space of tool making for customers and collaboration. And collaboration and enterprise collaboration is kind of a broad category. And we have a lot of different usage. Like we have customers, a lot of customers in technology. We have a ton of customers in APAC regions, right? We have different use cases, healthcare customers, legal customers, startups, super large companies, the Pokemon company, right? We have a variety of users, and as a result, for the data that we can gather, we can create benchmarks in a way that's really representative of general enterprise knowledge work. And that's very distinct for a provider of, for a company of our size, to have the amount of data that we have. And I think also there's an element of like commitment to rigor and frontier capabilities. So there was a point where we had saturated our evals. Every time a new model came out, we would be like, okay, it's like 100% pass rate. It's better than the last one. That's not helpful anymore. I mean, it's helpful in that we don't regress. So, that's why I kind of laughed. Hopefully every model upgrade, we're not catching regressions. But it's also important for us to understand, what do we want to be good at? What is the frontier of what we want to do? And by the way, this eval set is the same eval set that if we ever were to fine tune a model, if we ever were to say, what does Notion need to be uniquely good at, this representative eval set should be harness agnostic and should be the same thing that we would use to train or evaluate that, right? It's a core competency that every company needs to own to differentiate themselves in our perspective. And so it's heavily invested in. And in order to scale your company, it's very important in the same way unit tests and CI have been important in software engineering for a very long time.
Lovely. And just interested in the view about as an increase in applied AI companies shipping, can you share your views on how some of these vertical models like Harvey, Cursor versus the horizontal models, the evals that's done under Notion?
What is the question particularly?
So the vertical models that are evolving in Cursor and Harvey, comparing those to the evals that happen at the horizontal ones at Notion.
The evals, how are the evals different?
Yes.
Of course. Those evals are targeting particular competencies and capabilities when it comes to subject matter expertise. Enterprise work, like what does Notion need to be good at? It needs to understand how to orchestrate lots of different tools and think about how to do work and processes. So like, imagine that you're onboarding a new chief of staff to a company that's trying to streamline communications and streamline the process of a launch calendar, right? The competencies of that are understanding conflicting information, understanding how to do enterprise search very well, understanding the relevancy of different enterprise search sources, being able to use Notion very well, obviously for the Notion agent, and being able to do like long horizon thinking on a variety of verticals, as opposed to a particular competency on a specific vertical.
Last question. So there's a tweet on Mythos we have been discussing internally. I'll just read out the tweet. Mythos appears to be the first class of models trained at scale on Blackwells. Then will be Vera Rubin's. Pre-training isn't saturated, reinforced learning works, and there is so much computing coming online soon. Just when we read your essay, we felt like it co-authored along 3 lines. One is definitely a thoughtful practitioners with a key eye on scaling customer value. Technologist, economist, and strategist. So how are you thinking about next phase of AI adoption and what does it mean for your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of going back to where we started, I think the way everyone works is different. And so Notion's commitment is to be the best collaborative place for where people go to do their work. And we're changing people to be inclusive of agents because people are doing their work through agents. So being able to orchestrate agents directly from Notion, right? We just co-launched with Anthropic on their managed agent product, being able to, in your task database, assign a status like Claude, please try a first try at this bug looking at this PRD, right? And so when we think about like how capabilities grow, there are primitives that Notion firmly believes are important. So regardless of who or what is collaborating, the system of record of Notion is built on top of primitives. It's built on top of the concept of a transcription or a meeting note, a database, a page, and those pages can have elements that are nested in each other and can be shared. And those primitives, we believe, are fundamental collaboration points regardless of who's collaborating. If you think about on your coding agent, if you look at your skills file, that's Markdown. Like Notion is right for Markdown, right? But how do you share your individual coding agent workflow, right? There's this kind of saying, which is a little bit ironic now given, I guess, reliability, but Claude Code is really successful because of GitHub. It's successful because of version controlling and collaboration, right? We believe that we can bring that to enterprise work in general as enterprise work is being done by agents. Because there's a lot of enterprise thirst for how do we adopt agents. Like we really see that And there's the Fortune 500, which have a bunch of Palantir consultants that are helping them, or they're fine-tuning Mistral models on their own workspace, and they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars into this. But what about the Fortune 5 million who maybe don't even have a software engineering team, right? Who want to understand how to adopt these AI workflows, but they need to be HIPAA compliant. They need permissioned access to data. Their data is sprawled in different places. They want to control cost, right? And that's where we believe if that is where work is moving, we've been building for this kind of the whole time. And we're thinking about how to structure what we build to work in that space. And those are the users that we're targeting and trying to make and serve accessible, which is why cost is important, right?
Lovely.
Because not everyone wants to pay top dollar reasoning for everything they do. And we want to give them the opportunity to select and choose. So we have to build for the frontier, and we're committed to that because there are people that token max on Notion, and we want them to token max on Notion, and we want to make them billionaires, through Swicks's talk. By the way, that slide about the trillion tokeners, I was on it, and I'm not a billionaire, so that's why you guys heard me laugh out loud. I was not yet. I was like name number 7 and hasn't hit the Wells Fargo yet. But we want to make everyone a token maxer. We do. And at the same time, we have customers that don't want everyone in their company to be a token maxer for email triage, right? Like you don't need to token max your email triage necessarily. And we all still have budgets, right? And the money isn't coming out of thin air. A lot of it's being funneled to Frontier Labs because they want you to pay by token. And tokens aren't necessarily the best way to process everything. Some things should happen on CPU. The GPU isn't for everything. And respectfully, Philip, because inference engineering on GPUs is important, but GPUs aren't for everything. Can we make it agree, right? And so how do we configure all of these things together so that this AI psychosis can be productive and actually create work and value?
Lovely. Yeah. Any questions from anybody?
Models from the Frontier Labs.
Yeah.
What is Notion's thought process or approach towards this?
Yeah, I think right now, so we're model agnostic in that there's no point in time in which Notion says we're an OpenAI house, we're a base 10 house. Like you'll never see that from us, and that's an important selling point to our customers because that horse race changes more frequently than contracts, right? And no one wants to make themselves obsolete contractually. In terms of our approach to open source, right now, my observation is that models are being developed for more and more reasoning capacity. And the price on that is increasing. And for that high level of reasoning capacity, that price is probably appropriate. However, models that were fantastic at a lot of tasks are being deprecated. And so all that's left from first-party models are absolute frontier capabilities at premium rates. There are cheaper models that these labs provide that tends to be cheaper because of latency, or it tends to be cheaper because of quality, but there's a no man's land in the middle. There's a no man's land of where the Frontier Labs were 6 months ago, right? Like, where's our GPT-5 open source model, right? That's where our customers, like, if you think about a triangle of cost, latency, and quality, you can put lots of models everywhere in the triangle, but there's a whole area when it comes to a certain amount of capability and speed of where we were 6 months ago that saturated a lot of knowledge work. And I don't think that should be controversial to say. Not everything needs to be that hard, right? And that whole area of knowledge work has been saturated, but first-party Frontier Labs are trying to charge you for tomorrow's hardest tasks on what you were doing yesterday. And if what you did yesterday didn't work with yesterday's model, that's fantastic. And we're all developing more because we have more capable models. But also what you were doing yesterday, you might want to keep at yesterday's price because it didn't get better tomorrow, right? It can't get better. We've saturated what knowledge can do, what knowledge models need to do. And that's where I really believe in open source. And I really believe that more people need to be embracing it because I think this market is really inefficient right now. I think that there's like an oligopoly of 3 to maybe 4 people, and they just need to be a little bit cheaper than the person who's slightly better than them, and they'll win market share. And by the way, that is also true with inference, right? I also think that inference models are being charged in a way where they're trying to have you commit to provision throughput or commit to long amounts of traffic, because they also know that if a frontier lab tomorrow comes out with a reasoning model that's cheaper, they also might lose traffic. And so everybody's trying to structure you away from looking at what's best today, because they're trying to structure you to commit to what was best when you signed your contract. But your customers shouldn't have to be privy to that. And I think open source is a release valve to an inefficient market, but it is not the only answer.
Hi, Sarah. One thing I really love about using Notion is all of the different modalities. It's not just text. I have structured data. I have images and audio and video and all that sort of stuff. How do you think about native multimodality when you're building agents?
Yeah, I think right now, to be honest, it's underinvested. For instance, like we actually use base 10 to stream meeting notes. So when you do transcription, our primary subprocessor is base 10. When you trigger an agent from your meeting notes, we're triggering it based on the tokens that have been transcribed, not on the MP3 files, right? So we haven't explored a lot of that modality in terms of like vision or video. Obviously, like we index charts and graphs so that you can search over them, but that's pretty much the level of maturity we have today, and that's an area of an investment. But I think that your question about modality isn't just like pixels versus tokens, but about the different types of structured data. And I think that that's where every company has to really think about building their product in a way that agents can use them well, right? So for instance, Notion is investing very heavily in our MCP and our CLI because we will rebuild how Notion works for users underneath so that it works better for agents. Because of what I mentioned earlier, because traffic is coming from agents more and more. And so when I think about our modalities, part of it is like we need to invest in making them speak really well to agents. A year and a half ago, all of our agentic work happened in this really complicated XML that was totally lossless in how it converted into Notion blocks and Notion representations, right? But then we had to teach these models how to speak really particular Notion Markdown. And at the end of the day, it was nerfing the models and making them over-focus on that. What if we just had a slightly less expressive version of regular Markdown that the models knew how to speak, and then had some deterministic code that transferred it well? And then maybe it can't do everything a Notion block can do, but we're still able to bring our customers frontier capabilities. The second point on that, which, you know, I'll say facetiously, used to be kind of our biggest disadvantage, is that Notion is like a blank page when you look at it and can be really daunting to a lot of users because it's just primitives, right? And it's like, okay, I see these people on TikTok or YouTube that are like, here's how I hacked my life with the best Notion dashboard ever. And then you see a blank page and you're like, I don't know how to, you know, / command my way into that, right? And that was a huge growth issue for us 2 years ago. However, having a very unopinionated UX, or rather strong opinions about having a simple UX and just primitives, let us leapfrog into the agentic tool calling world, because those primitives are exactly what AI is building on top of. There's no complexity of, well, the user sees this button, right? Or it's our CSS is so beautiful and our React components do it this way. We have way less of that than a lot of our competitors because our primitives are simply that, they are primitives. Even the way the agent works, like its memory is docs and databases, right? It's using itself and enhancing itself to work well. And we believe that if we invest really well in those primitives and the ability to edit those primitives well, the agent can be unleashed and you have to tell it to do less.
This is really great, fantastic speech. So this is Helena, and I'm from Z.KI, the AI lab behind the GM 5.1. It's an open source model. So my question is, as a foundation model company, we're actually really pursue and achieve the AGI, but we're really saying the definition of AGI should belong to all the users. And as we say, Notion is really great, fantastic AI applications. So maybe you guys could know more about what users really want. So I'm really going to ask, what is your perspective to define what is AGI and how we're going to achieve the AGI at the final stage?
That would be an awesome soundbite if I could give it to you. The question is like, what's our version of when we achieve AGI or not? We are not in the business of committing to saying that we delivered AGI. We are in the business of delivering work and value to our customers. And most of our customers do not care if we've hit a definition of AGI or not. They care if their ARR is increasing, if their SaaS sprawl is decreasing, and their seat-based pricing makes sense to them, right? And so I actually find a lot of that conversation slightly distracting for applied AI companies. It's very flashy, it's very interesting, and it derives no user value. What I will say is that we are at a place where we're no longer treating our AI like an assistant, but rather a coworker that owns entire processes. And I think that that is a leap that is dramatic. And in a sense, we are treating it like a coworker with full knowledge, right? And I think there's no point in which we'll say we're done and it's achieved, because like I said, maybe AGI is being able to do that really cheaply. I mean, obviously that's not the definition of AGI, but like that might be what's best to our customers for the work that they're doing today. And I think those are the hard questions that we're focused on answering, and we leave it to the frontier labs to decide when they get to send the tweet that they achieved AGI. It won't be coming from us.
All right. It's just a very simple question. So just wondering, because Notion is used by people and agents, what are the categories of agents that are most commonly using Notion?
So there's what's most common today and what we want to be really good at, and those are slightly different because part of building frontier AI applications is teaching your users what's possible, right? I will say there are a couple of components where we believe we need to do very well. One of them has been and will always be enterprise search. That was, one of our first AI investments was Notion Q&A. We continue to staff a team fully on agent trajectories on building context. And I firmly believe in order to do an action well, you need to find the right context. So that will always be true. However, that's not the only work that we do. So for instance, a key use case of the custom agents that we ship today is bug triage. You'd be surprised how often issues come up and there's like 3 PMs or a PGM just dedicated to figuring out who it belongs to and what the context of that issue is. That's been a huge adoption use case. So we have a lot of customers where you can just like drop something into a Slack channel, a custom agent is listening, it looks at its own constitution or team's directory, forwards that issue to that team and files a task to that team, right? And if that team says, actually, this belongs to the mobile team, it updates itself next time. Next thing you know, your company's not dropping any bugs. It doesn't matter where they show up. Another one that I really like has to do with how we operate our teams and how we communicate progress. So if anyone's an engineering leader here, they know like writing updates about what your project has done is really painful and really important, depending if you're reading or writing them, right? And that's not just in engineering, that's everywhere. And so one of the like hero use cases that we certainly have one of our highest adoption of is the idea of being able to form a custom agent that understands a project or a concept and looks everywhere and can write an update. The one that I have configured will also, when I write my updates for my CTO weekly, if there's like OpenAI Flex tier, what's the status of shipping that? And it can't figure that out in the task database and Slack and meeting notes. It just pings the person that it thinks is most familiar, asks it for an update in Slack, and then updates itself, and then sends me a notification after 3 hours when people have or haven't responded, and it's done the most research it needed to do, right? These are processes. It's not one person's particular job, but these are processes that companies are saving hundreds of hours on a day by automating agents to do. Yeah. Just the question in case everyone else didn't hear, it's like, a month ago I wrote a rant on X saying like, welcome to Token Town, it's the Wild West. This is how the market is working. If you're not one of these 3 companies, here's how to navigate it, right? Because I think people kind of all assume that we all, there's other people and there's a lot of industry working around this, right? And not everyone is negotiating in the trillions and trillions of tokens a month. And so the question was like, what's the foresight of what we're not talking about next? I think the next thing is that it's not just models. There's the trifecta of quality, cost, and latency, but AI products have other trifectas. There's autonomy, user intervention, and ease of use, right? How do you create a secure, it's autonomy, user intervention, access to external data, and exfiltration, and ease of use, right? That's another trifecta that's very difficult to manage. Data, exfiltration, and security. You know, that's why you see people freaking out about the idea of their employees using OpenClaw, right? Because there's a whole element about actually building AI systems for real work that is a lot more than what the model's capable of. It's what the model has access to, how it's versioned, how it's interpreted by different users, how it handles conflicting instructions. And I think that people that are starting to use these models and bring them into production are learning a lot of these lessons the hard way. And that's not just about like reasoning capabilities, right? It's about how you orchestrate how these models talk to each other and act safely. And I think that we're gonna see the idea of an AI security engineer and data exfiltration. We're hiring for that if you know anyone or you want that job. But that is a field, and it's an incredibly, incredibly important field, much more important than cost, because a security incident kills your company, a bad quarter may or may not, right? And I think that I'm afraid, as a user, I'm afraid that people are gonna learn that the hard way, and they're under-investing in some of those problems because they're just thinking about capability.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Raman.
Thank you.